Hello, and welcome to Yesterday, Today, and Forever, a virtual ministry of the Churches of Christ. It is our desire to present to the 21st century person the faith of the first century Christians. We seek unity through the acceptance of the faith that was once and for all time delivered unto the saints, a system of faith which first began to be spoken by our Lord prior to his crucifixion, and was later confirmed to the saints by the apostles and inspired writers of the New Testament. Thus a faith from yesterday to today and into forever. Our speaker is Brian Barrett, who preaches for the church at Bear Branch, in Spurlockville, West Virginia. We encourage all persons interested in the faith of our fathers to open their Bibles, as we search the Scriptures, for these eternal truths, which can lead Christians back into unity as the family of God. Now, here is Brian.
Good morning. Our lesson today comes out of Revelation chapter 17. Revelation chapter 17. And there came one of the seven angels, which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit in the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-covered beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. And the angel said unto me, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, which have the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit, and go into perdition, and they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. And they beheld the beast that was and is not, and yet is. And here is the mind that hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and another is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he, the 8th, is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb. The Lamb shall overcome them, for he is the Lord of lords, the King of kings. And they that are with him are called the chosen and faithful. And he said unto me, The waters which thou sawest, where the whore sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. For God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree and give their kingdom unto the beast. until the words of God shall be fulfilled. And the woman which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. 17th chapter is another one of those that is filled with all kinds of symbolism, leads people into all kinds of guesses. The Revelation writer in his statement here in verse 9 says that it is possible for those who have wisdom to interpret and to understand the things which are being viewed in chapter 17. And of course, the picture that we have there in chapter 17 is one of these what I would call monstrosities. We have people who read the book of Revelation. I can remember my mom when we were little, and she would sit and read the Bible to us, and we would be sitting there, and she got to the book of Revelation, was reading that, and I mean, she was so amazed and terrified at the same time. At some time would come in the future where these literal beasts, she read everything literally, and so she was terrified that some kind of monstrous beast with all these heads and horns and all would show up, and again the things that are written here, and everybody grabs a hold of the book of Revelation, and as we've said before, they go where they want to go. But chapter 17 has to fit inside the framework of what we're talking about. If it doesn't fit within the framework of what we're talking about, whatever your interpretation of that is, it can't be the right interpretation. I mean, if it's something completely different, has nothing to do with what we're talking about, then what's it doing here? And so we have to understand the basic premise that we've been dealing with all along, that these are things that were shortly to come to pass. And the primary emphasis was on the judgment of the city of Jerusalem, and God's wrath being poured out upon the city and the nation and those who had refused to accept the seal of God in their foreheads, those who had rejected the will of God, the way of God. And so if we keep that in mind, it shouldn't be too difficult then as we enter into this, if we have enough wisdom and enough understanding to wade our way through the first 16 chapters. The 17th chapter on is, again, not going to be that complex. I can kind of, like I said, as a child, I could see the amazement and the wonder that my mother had of these beasts, that she was just reading about it. And so John is seeing these images. He's painting this mental picture for us. And then we are to seek out the understanding of that. And seeing the amazement that she had, I can just almost see somebody reaching over and pushing John's mouth shut, that his mouth was just hanging over in open in amazement and astonished as he was looking at this scene unfolding. And one of the seven angels who had been pouring out these various judgments, which filled up the judgment of God, when we look here, they came, verse 1, there came one of those seven angels, which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters. And so with that, he says, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit. So this is not literally, but he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness. And I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-covered beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones, pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. So, as we look at this and making application of this, we come to understand that in the book of Revelation, there's 2 women that are spoke of there. There is the Israel, the woman who faithfully brought about the end of God's intent to bring the Messiah into the world through the nation of Israel and through the lineage of that. But there was also another side of that, and this other woman always strives and struggles with the things of God. She has always been kind of a wayward woman. And again, I don't think you can get much more stronger than just the fact that she was a harlot, she was a prostitute, she was, as King James says, whore. They made no attempt to even just say that she was a fornicator. The King James translators, again, make it painfully. For some people to hear this kind of language coming out of the scriptures, it's almost painful to use or try to retranslate the words. But I believe that the King James translators wanted us to understand that this woman is not anything like the ideal woman that brought about the Messiah. This woman is a contradiction of things. We see her dressed in purple and fine linen and a golden cup and adorned with precious gems and jewels. She appears on the outside to, again, be a very impressive sight for John. Someone who is seen as elaborate, being clothed in scarlet. These are the clothes of royalty. These, again, are the things of riches and the upper crust of society. Purple, scarlet, gold and precious stones and pearls. Golden cup, which John says was filled up, was full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And so outwardly she was arrayed and dressed as royalty. And again, at the same time, her actions, her deeds was not of some woman of prestige. She was most certainly not royalty. But John keeps using the idea of fornications, abominations, whore, those very sharp words as a contradiction. She appears one way, but her past, her history, that cup that is filled up with all of these abominations is contradictory. And so again, yes?
Well, one woman comes to mind, and that's Cleopatra.
Cleopatra. When you think about this.
Yep, that does, because that's what she was.
She used her position, her power, her sexuality to manipulate And again, that's a good parallel. It's not, it's not what this is, but it's a good parallel. She looked like and acted and was in a position of a queen. When we look, and again, when we see this and the interpretation it comes, we know that we're looking at the judgment of the city of Jerusalem and the nation of that. When you went into Jerusalem, it was a place, of course, where the temple of God was. It was a place that was adorned with gold and silver and precious stones. People brought gifts from all over the world and gave them. I mean, they would put bronze coating on a door, and then they would bring silver and they would cover the door in silver, and then they would plate it in gold. I mean, it's just an ongoing thing. Some of the writers speak about the city and the temple itself being adorned with white marble, so pure and so white, which would have been so expensive. But when we see pure white, we think of what? Purity. The temple itself, some had written that when they came toward the city of Jerusalem and the temple was there, covered in all this white marble and trimmed in gold, it was like looking at a snow-capped mountain. If anybody's ever been in or around Golden, Colorado, and seen the mountain there, I mean, it's an amazing sight. You understand why they call it Golden, Colorado. I mean, the whole top of this snow-covered mountain looks like gold with the sun shining on it. It reflects sunshine, and it just looks like the mountaintop is covered in gold. And then the purity of the snow. Well, again, Jerusalem was much the same. As you came there, you saw the priests arrayed in white garments, and you saw the purity of the temple. You went through all the things of the sacrifices, and you thought everything was amazing. You just thought that everything was fine. But the truth of the matter is that there was all kinds of corruption, greed, wrongdoings that were going on underneath. And of course, we could start, with the thing that we're most familiar with. And of course, that was the ill will between the religious leaders and Jesus when he was on earth, and how the high priest and the Sanhedrin and many others conspired together to put him to death. On the outside, Jesus even said about them, they were a whited sepulcher. Outside, it was whitewashed, and it was so pretty, and the sun and nice and white. I mean, people around here used to whitewash their trees in the spring. I don't see too many of them anymore, but you always see the bottoms of the trees whitewashed in the spring. And all the trees in the yard, just kind of a decorative kind of thing. But again, rather than purity, it was filled with all kinds of abominations. We see them entering into an agreement with Judas to betray Christ for 30 pieces of silver. Now, I have no idea where the silver came from because it doesn't really say. We just know they had and gave him 30 pieces of silver. But when Judas saw that Jesus was betrayed and Jesus was not going to fight, and in essence, he was going to be put to death, Judas was greatly troubled by that, and he came back and tried to give them the 30 pieces of silver. I don't want anything to do with it. And again, the priests began to talk, or the leaders talked among themselves, saying, we can't take this money. This is blood money. We can't put that into the treasury. So again, having heard it, he went and hung himself. They bought the potter's field to bury people who were poor and indigent at that time. So again, we see great contradictions. You know, it's okay for them to pay 30 pieces of silver wherever they got it. Where, you know, I wonder if it didn't come out of the treasury. It's okay to take it out of the treasury. You know, if they were receiving salaries, pay, whatever, if they were getting their tithes out of the temple and all of that, I mean, that, you know, it's just a strange contradiction. But again, Jesus says in Matthew 23 about the blood of all the prophets, from righteous Abel all the way up until Zacharias, and he talks about all of that. You know, he sent prophets and he sent people to them. Again, some of them they shut up in prison, some of them they stoned, they persecuted them. And Jesus said all of that would come upon that generation. And so the idea is this cup of abominations that she's holding, Jesus says it's going to reach fullness with this generation. God has let her get away with a lot of things without judging her too harshly. But now, rather than repenting, the cup is filled up. And so it's time for her to answer fully and completely for what she has done. Now, in talking about abominations and filthiness and that kind of language, people automatically go to the literal, but in the book of Exodus, chapter 20, we find the Big Ten, as I call them, those Big Ten commandments. And part of that was, you shall not have any gods before me. You shall not make any graven images to bow down to them. And again in Exodus 34, later on in verses 15 through 16, God speaks of the children of Israel that they not bow themselves down to the gods of the land, and that they not create graven images, and that they not give their sons and daughters into marriages with these people. And it's interesting that the language God uses there is, lest they go a-whoring after their gods. Lest they go a-whoring after their gods. And so that's kind of an interesting aspect. And of course, by that language again, we're talking about spiritual fornication. We're committing, and since Israel technically was supposed to be the bride of God, she was his bride, just like the church is the bride of Christ. When she engaged in all of these actions, she was committing adultery, and in the language of that day, she was, as we would say, whoring around. I mean, that's what it is, and there's no way, there's no attempt to cover this up. The King James uses it in the Old Testament about creating idols, about engaging in the worship of other idols. And again, it says that was written on her forehead. Now, there's two things. There's the beast is going to have something written on it, and she has something written on her forehead. We need to understand that the woman is not the beast, and the beast is not the woman. They're two separate things. The woman is sitting on the beast. She's riding the beast. She's being uplifted or held up by the beast. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery. Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Now, this concept that we have of abominations and filthiness and those kind of things are found in God's speaking to Israel. And I'm not going to take time to turn and read all of this, but I think for those who are following along, if you want to take time, take notes, go back and follow this, it's not like there's only one or two verses. Jeremiah 2:7 uses this kind of language. Jeremiah 4, verse 1. Jeremiah 6, verse 15. Jeremiah 7, verse 10 and 30. Jeremiah 44, 1 through 10 is a good verse to turn and read because it covers a lot of this in the language that we see John using here in the Revelation. And as I said, again, the book of Revelation, if you know the Old Testament, you know how God spoke to his people in the Old Testament and how he described things in the Old Testament, then you'll understand what he's talking about in the New Testament. Then we have Ezekiel 6:9, Ezekiel 14:6, Ezekiel 22:2. And so again, these are individuals who have done, are doing what Exodus 20, Exodus 34, and so many other places forbid. And it's interesting, we will turn and read one because it kind of sums up the situation just prior to the coming of Jesus and the church. Go back with me to Malachi, the 2nd chapter. Malachi chapter 2, we're going to read from verse 11. Malachi chapter 2, verse 11. Judah hath dealt treacherously, and an abomination is committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah hath profaned the holiness of the Lord, which he loved, and hath married the daughter of a strange god. So again, we know what Jesus taught. If a man puts away his wife, then it's not for the cause of fornication, and she's married to another, then she commits adultery. And so if you have a woman who's not divorced, because God did not divorce Judah or Israel or Jerusalem, she was still his bride. And so the bride goes out and she has committed abominations. She's married herself and become daughter of strange gods. And so this is just one of those images, again, that the Judah has profaned the holiness of the Lord. I mean, the city of Jerusalem has become blasphemy. It's become a blasphemy that people come to the house of God in Jerusalem for to worship, and the people who are administering that worship are a bunch of people filled with abominations and filthiness that are nowhere near what God wants them to be. Now, I'm not saying that every single individual, that there weren't any people there who tried their best to be righteous and do what the law said, but we're talking about the whole city. And we're talking about people, again, who had not received the mark of God in their forehead. They're not this 144,000, this group out of all the 12 tribes, which symbolize those of Israel who heard the gospel's message, and they were obedient to the gospel's message. And so we're not saying that there weren't Israelites who did respond. There were. There were Israelites sealed. There were those who would wear white and would dwell with Jesus and would receive a crown of righteousness because they were faithful unto death. But this woman here and the beast are used to persecute the saints of God, the martyrs. Babylon the Great. It's interesting. Of course, we know that when Judah went into Babylonian captivity, of course, the temple was destroyed. But while Judah was in captivity, there were changes made to the worship and service of God. We see the rise of the so-called rabbis and synagogues and all these things, people worshiping. God said you're going to come to Jerusalem and to worship. Of course, they couldn't go there, so they created synagogues in all the different cities. And it's interesting that the Jews use a set of commentaries on the law, the prophets, that are called the Talmud. We've talked about that before. And it's interesting that the Talmud, which is used in a sort of primary sense, is called the Babylonian Talmud. And so it bears the actual name of Babylon on it. It is at least a beginning is a product of the Babylonian captivity, the rabbi system, the Pharisees, the rise of all these groups, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, and their various interpretations. And we see in Jesus' day how far things were off. We have the Pharisees who, rather than teaching people to be obedient to the law, circumvents the law. And he accused them in vain, worshiping him, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. That pretty much, again, shows us in that sense. We have the Sadducees who didn't believe in angels. They didn't believe in the resurrection and lots of different aspects in that. I mean, who can read the Bible and not believe in angels? I mean, angels start showing up in Genesis 3. We have the cherubim. We have the angelic messengers that come that warn of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. We have angels all throughout the Old Testament. We see that, but they denied that. They denied the existence and all of that. Mother of harlots and abominations on the earth. And as, again, if you go back and you look at all of those verses that I've gave you from Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Malachi, there is, again, in Leviticus, I'm not going to get into all that, but in Leviticus, Moses warns the children of Israel that sacrificing things to these idols is sacrificing them to devils. And so when you engage in this whoredom, when you engage in these false teachings and false doctrines and things, whether you call it Judaism or whether you call it whatever they called it, if it's not the truth of God, whatever worship you're giving is worship which is given to devils. And Paul repeats that in his writing to the church at Corinth, where he talks about the things which the Gentiles sacrifice. They sacrifice to devils. We know that these idols are nothing. Paul tells us that. We understand that, if we have a good sense, we know that these idols are nothing. They're just gold, silver, stone, whatever. But when we start engaging in the worship of them, we are, in essence, turning our worship from the God of heaven, who is a jealous God. He made that clear with Israel from the beginning. I'm a jealous God. and you shall have no other gods before me. And he tells them right off the bat, if you go wandering off, don't expect me to accept that. It doesn't really matter which God you worship. All gods are the same. No, they're not. There is one God in heaven. The Lord our God is one God, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul. These are the things that were taught. So this woman who is masquerading around in some glorious apparel, decked out with all the glamour and glitz, is just masquerading and covering up the abominations which are carried in the cup. And the woman is drunken with the blood of the saints. And this is what Jesus said, all the prophets, all of those of old, that they have persecuted, that the leadership of Jerusalem, whatever they were, wherever they were in time, as they persecuted them, is drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of martyrs of Jesus. And of course, the martyrs of Jesus are who? Christians. And again, who started the persecution of the church? Christians. Who started that? Gentiles? Who became the driving force behind persecuting and killing Christians? I mean, a lot of people say, well, Saul of Tarsus. Well, yeah, but he was just the dirty man. He's the one who got his hands dirty, but it was the leadership. He received letters from the chief priests authorizing him to go into strange cities. And if anybody called on the name of the Lord, to bring them bound in Jerusalem, and he compelled them to blaspheme. When they were put to death, he gave his voice against them. And so they launched the persecution of the saints, the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. There's where I say, it's almost like he stands there with his mouth agape. He's just amazed at her. And the angel said, wherefore dost thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, which have the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell in the earth shall wonder, whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. And here is the mind of wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. This is the start. Rome has been known for, I don't know how long, going back, as the city of 7 hills. I mean, that's its identifying feature. And John says, let me tell you about these 7 kings, these 7 that you see here. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And again, as I remind that the woman is sitting on the beast, the woman is not the beast. She's not of the beast. The beast has horns which are growing out of it, those are of the beast, and they are connected to the beast. But the woman is sitting on or riding the beast. And so the woman is separate and apart from that. And we've looked at these verses before, but again, these 7 mountains and 7 horns also represent 7 kings, 5 of which we're told are fallen. 1 is, and another is not yet come, and when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7th, and goeth into perdition, or into damnation. And we've looked at this before. We're told of the 7 kings, of course, which belong to and attached to the 7-hilled city, which are the Caesars. Number 1, Julius Caesar. Number 2, Augustus Caesar. Number 3, Tiberius Caesar. Number 4, Caligula. Number 5 is Claudius. And then we come to the 6th, which is Nero. And when we come to Nero, of course, that takes us back and connects us back with the mark of the beast, which is a number of man, which again is Nero. And it's interesting that when we look at this, 5 are fallen, and 1, the other is not yet come, which is in the process, which was Nero, of coming in to power, who would continue for a short space. And again, with that is connected 7 and 8. After the death of Nero, 7, Vespasian, which was the army general charged with the destruction of Jerusalem, he ultimately went back to Jerusalem and ascended to the throne of Nero and became, in essence, Caesar. And in so doing, he wanted to complete the task which he had started. And so he sends his son, the 8th, which is a part of the 7th, and that, again, is Titus. Titus is the one that is depicted on the archway of Titus. When you look in the city of Rome, one of the things that, again, is a mark besides the Colosseum is the archway there in Rome. You see that huge big archway. That's a memorial to Titus, who brought about the destruction of the Jewish people as far as a nation. And so we see that the animal itself, the beast, the living creature, this thing which is depicted here, has to do with Nero, has to do with Rome. And the woman is Israel. And we'll look, and John begins to pull all these things together. He says, "And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast." It's interesting that Rome, Herod, who was Herod? What was Herod? Was he? I mean, he had the title, King Herod. Herod was king, but was he?
He wasn't Alba tribe of...
He came from Idumea, Esau. He was a descendant of Esau. But the fact of the matter was, they called them kings. They received power as kings. But who pulled the strings? Rome. You know, Herod was interested in how Rome received things. These different people all over the world that had, quote, quote, kingdoms and were called kings or whatever title they had. Notice the language John uses. They received power as kings. They're really not that independent. They're stuck, just like a horn, stuck in the skull of this beast. They're permanently attached. If it wasn't for Rome, they wouldn't be kings. And if they tried to overthrow Rome, Rome would destroy them. So they basically became token kings. They had a title, they had certain power and could make certain choices, but all those choices needed to make sure it lined up with what Rome said, because if you did something that Rome didn't like, then you're going to lose that. And so these are kind of important statements here. They receive power as kings 1 hour, a short period of time. It's not literally an hour, but again, we're not talking about a great deal of time. Many of these people changed over and over and over and over, these rulers and different people, because one way or the other they offended Rome or caused some kind of problem.
Well, they were just certain provinces.
Yeah.
Then they were called kings.
Yeah, they were given certain provinces to reign and rule over. And of course, they really, kings in the Bible, we see many of them going to war with other kings to enlarge their territory. No, not going to happen, because, I've given you this territory. That's all that you have, and that's all that you get. And again, you can't go to war. You can't fight with these kings. And so they were all in submission and subjected and subjects of Rome. Now, the woman and the beast and those kings and all of those, we're told these have one mind. They are united in purpose. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 1 and 10 to the church, be united together in the same mind and in the same judgment. To have one mind in essence. These have one mind. They have one goal. They have one purpose. These shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These kings and all of the kingdom and their soldiers and all of this were connected with and connected to Rome. And so they didn't have independence. They just provided and helped provide power and strength to the beast that rules over them.
Why not make this the day that you and your family seek out the Church of Christ in your community? We encourage you to attend one of our worship times or Bible studies. God's grace, truth, and salvation is truly worth finding and knowing. May God bless and keep you as we walk together in His truth. And remember, as always, the Churches of Christ salute you. Our new programs are posted to Facebook and YouTube on Thursday afternoon, and they should be available for viewing by 7 p.m. We also encourage our viewers to visit our website at www.thechurchesofchrist.life. We ask that you like us on Facebook and share our programs. On YouTube, please share and subscribe for notifications. This program was pre-recorded.